Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Protective Insight podcast. Thank you so much to those that tuned in to our very first one. Due to the feedback that we've been gratefully receiving from you, we understand that it was been received quite well, which is lovely to hear. And today we're going to be addressing some of the questions that came out of that in terms of. Predominantly, wouldn't you say, Jim? Why us? Why should people listen? What makes what we have to say any better or worse than somebody else, right?
Oh, 100%. And interesting too, right? For me, it was one of those things like upon receiving that question, I was like, wow, you know what? I actually didn't think about it. And the reason I don't think about it because from my standpoint, I'm sure you can agree, Ben, it isn't about us, right? Like the reason we were doing the podcast and why we're here today, it's not for us to sit here and regurgitate. We've had X amount of years of experience in this, and we've done this, and then you just are just resume bulleting for 20 minutes. And I know from my perspective as an instructor and a teacher over the years, I always couldn't stand the ones that got in front of the room in the first 20 minutes of a course you thought was going to be great. And all you get is the war stories. And this is what I did 20 years ago and 30 years ago. And it's like, although that's great, my mind always goes to, well, what are you doing now?
Yeah.
What relevance does what you did 20 years ago work in 2023?
Absolutely.
So when I look at things that people ask me, like, well, if it comes up and it's relevant to the context of the conversation, which kind of today we'll dabble on it. But on the same time, I'm going to tell you, you can go find me on LinkedIn. You can look me up or put a chat in specifically. You could find out. I'll give you some things, but if it's not overly relevant, because it's not about me. We want to get you content. I want to get you content. And it's not for me to sit here and go, because of my background, you should go here and read this book, or you should listen to these guys.
Yeah.
It's more of, look, I'm a human just like you. I'm curious just like you. I'm trying to make the best decisions for myself, my family, my colleagues when it comes to training, personal interactions, who I spend my time with conversations, right? So that's where I'm coming from with it. It's like, no, it isn't about us. I love it. We'll give you some more about us if you haven't heard of us. We are kind of on the cusp where it comes with our company and organization. We're kind of seen and heard and understood in the security EP industry, but we understand, Ben being in the UK, they might not have heard of me over, but they might know of you, and more so people know more of you than me just based off background and stuff you've done. But for that, I'll jump off here. Ben, give them, let's
that's the
let's
thing.
give the audience what they want a little bit, but at the same time, folks just understand this is about you. This podcast is about you, helping you, giving you insights, training techniques, what we can provide to you. Whether you listen or not, we're leaving that open to you. That's your freedom to do so. If we're relevant and you hear us and you're like, man, these guys understand what they're talking about. They give us a valuable tool that I can use. And you can check it off and we fit into your routine. By all means, plug. That's what we're here for. If not, we understand. We're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. We're not going to be the right tool, for you. But at the same time, we hope we give you something, with our banter, right? Because the funny thing is, people, I think we'll find out, we'll tell you now, is Ben and I have been working together the last couple of years, but we've never met in person. We work in the same company. We work together. We drive all this together. All the relationship is built through here virtually. We plan on at some point getting together, either me going over there or Ben here. But this is just how effective conversations and people can work, and you can do this sort of thing and have this energy. And it's like you find like people. We're like, hey, let's do this. Let's be different and help folks. Right?
100%. Like the whole kind of CV angle always felt a bit like sort of intellectual chest beating. Like you see the monkeys in the zoo going, that's what it feels like. My CV is bigger and better than yours. Okay. Cool. Good. Good for you in that particular situation. What are you going to do with it that's going to help? That's all I'm concerned about in that way, and that's the whole reason that this started as an idea. It was more to ask questions that people are silently asking,
Oh yeah,
maybe to ask them a little bit louder, you know.
100%.
Yeah. So my background, if you're interested, it's a Google search away. It's by no means the most conventional background by any stretch of the imagination. But like my first introduction to the world of VP was through a martial arts school that I attended from the age of 12 to 17, and that led into what we would call bodyguard training over here. It's EP and the same thing. And then that quietened down for a bit, and I've pretty much experienced most of the lowly rungs of the security level, like mall security, doorman work, and all of this kind of stuff. And then I stepped into the private sector, taking on investigations, remote assessments, some real big deals, some real low deals. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
For
see,
companies that you've heard of,
and then
companies that
sorry,
you
folks,
haven't.
too, like I'm gonna have to stop Ben for a minute here too, and just go back to one thing he said for you, right? Because one thing I look at is when I hear things like the lowly rung of security.
Yeah,
Okay, being a doorman.
yeah.
Okay, a lowly rung, so to speak, in your terms, Ben. How many interactions do you have with people in the course of a shift?
Thousands,
Yeah.
thousands.
So during that time frame, right, the scope of like understanding situational
Yeah,
awareness, behavioral cues. All of a sudden, you start creating a Rolodex of what potential threat
hundred
indicators could
percent.
be, or who's going to be a problem, or who's going to be that boisterous, loud, obnoxious, drunk bloke, right, in an English bar that you feel like I may have to go inside and run into that guy again, and it's not going to be for
Well,
the
that's it.
pleasantries of exchanging an
Yeah,
ID, right?
yeah. And
So for
I'm
those out
not.
there that feel like you're in that lonely rung, understand it's not a lowly rung. You're going to get
No.
out of it what you put in, but those are the places
Mm,
where, as you'll hear from Ben and I as we go on with these podcasts,
yeah.
that's where most of the
That's why
experience
learning's
comes
done.
from. We can give you tons of books, and it's great, to read a book and theories, but the experience aspect, where are you going to be exposed to the most people, where you can actually apply the skill and the knowledge when it comes to the arts
Mm,
of conversation that we'll get into in later on episodes, and we'll give you some book reviews,
yeah.
and some places you can go for this. But sometimes the best thing is being thrown in the pool, right, when you're a young age and being tossed
Yeah.
in, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
sink or swim. And
No,
that's what
that's
I feel that it's like. You're in the door, you're outside, you're that barrier between the public and people having a good time in an establishment and
yeah.
having to serve, safeguard those folks inside that
Hundred
clientele.
percent.
And you're that barrier, right? You're that barometer and that reader of, sorry, mate, you can't come in because I can already tell you're going to be a problem. Well,
Little
Ben, how
bit
do you
too
know he's going to
much.
be a problem? Well, I've seen 2,000 people here in this last month, and all the ones that caused me a problem acted exactly like this guy. So I'm
Oh,
creating my,
yeah,
my
yeah.
Rolodex of people of, this is a problem, right?
Completely agree. Completely agree. And I got to say as well, just because it's so dear to my heart, I'm not demonizing it as a lowly rung. All I mean is it's maybe not as glamorized in
Oh,
that particular way. But you no, you
100%. Well, and I wouldn't say lowly either as like a demonized, but
no, 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 no.
we all start somewhere, right? And those are usually like
Absolutely,
the first steps of like crawl, walk, run. So it's like, okay,
absolutely.
we're crawling here, and what I look at is that's where you learn the key
The
basics and fundamentals
fundamentals. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
of the industry, and that goes into everything, right? When it comes to firearms training, understanding people, you have to get into the fundamental, the basic foundational aspects of
yeah,
anything in any industry. And once you grasp what those key fundamentals and basics are, now we start building. And now
mm,
we have a nice structure that we can work from and from work within that just
yeah.
makes us better. But there's also a good percent of people that when they get in there, like, oh man, like, and they take it that way, right? They're beaten down. I got to start here. And it's like, yeah, we all start from somewhere, but a little bit
Hundred
of work.
percent.
And you'd be amazed with some of the
Mm,
stuff we'll show you. If you are one of those guys starting out,
yeah,
we'll give you some tips on understanding that will accelerate you and help you, because then you'd be going to your supervisor, but oh man, how did you pick up on that?
yeah.
How did you see it? How did you know? Well, it's just this. I started processing things differently. I
Mm,
started taking a look at my environment differently.
yeah,
Um, and for those out there, we'll be doing segments later on of this great thing that Ben has put together and we've been working on for a little while of Polar. And we use that for the professional aspect there. And it's going to show you how to use people, objects, locations, actions, their reasoning. And we're going to show you how that all comes together. And man, before you know it, you're processing things so much differently. Um, And that's where we come in with our background and experience. And I know I cut Ben off, so I'm sorry, folks, but
No,
it's
no,
just one of
no.
the things I wanted to touch on, because that's one of the things that's near and dear to me, because I hear it so much from people.
Yeah,
Well, I'm just this, or I'm just that.
yeah.
And it's like,
It's
no, you're not just that. You're
reshape it.
more than
Reshape
that.
it. Yeah,
You are glass ceiling, putting a glass ceiling on yourself. You're
yeah,
putting yourself in a box that you shouldn't be in. So step outside the box. Like yourself, I'm going to go, no, okay, this is an awesome opportunity, because those are sometimes the things I like. I
yeah.
get to do some of the cool stuff, but when I get to go throw something on and go sit and be that guy that gets this,
Mm,
man, I love it, because it challenges me and puts me back
yeah,
to the basics.
yeah.
Because these are perishable skills and stuff that we're going to get into, and if we're not using them, whether it's art of conversation and situational awareness type things, I mean, you will start losing these things if you like allow your mindset to slip and go somewhere else and just get complacent and lax. You will be sadly, surprised that your
Mm,
skills aren't as sharp as they could be or once were. So you need to know how to keep them going. Keep that stuff
100%.
going on. And
100%.
with that, we'll jump back, because there's just so much to Ben, with what he has. That I probably do a whole podcast just on Ben, just because, like he said, his uniqueness. Because I
Stop.
love it, Ben, because you've gone from that in the security realm, and
Yeah,
then you've worked in, if I'm not right, the entertainment world of
yeah,
things,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
another key aspect
yeah,
and interesting aspect on taking people, right,
yeah,
and understanding behaviors and stuff. Because I
yeah.
don't know, I don't get to hang out with plenty of guys that understand magic or magicians, or have studied Sherlock Holmes the way you have. So I like to get someone to see that and just know, like, you can have. It's not always a B C D
Yeah,
ladder to get into. Hey, humans. No, it's like, if you care about humans, you love humans out there. There's just so many paths to go, and we'll show you just in this. Ben's path is way more
it's
interesting and
weird.
fun.
It's
Well, not
weird.
even weird, but it's just way more interesting and fun, and how we got to where, like, we're at with humans and behavior, and your
Yeah,
level of comprehension and understanding, as where mine is more like your, I mean, typical American fashion, right? It's just a straight line of, well, I did this and worked in this field and this job and had experience and contacts in this. But Ben, although having fun and getting to entertain and all this, getting here, and me kind of going here, we
we
converse at the
met.
same
Yeah,
points.
yeah,
And I think that's the fun part that people should get out of this, is like, our paths are all going to be in a way uniquely
different.
different, but there's
Mm,
so many waypoints along the way that align when it
mm,
comes to these things. You and I have a lot of similar views, similar
mm,
comprehension, understanding of so many things that we do, but your explanations on how you get to the answer to the equation versus how I get to the answer to the equation,
yeah,
it's slightly different, right? It's just watching. You
yeah.
got the same teacher in some aspects, and you're just like, huh, how'd you all do that? And so there is what I love with that, is when it comes to you guys out there listening, as about you, you get to pull from both of us and other experts and stuff we bring in,
Yeah,
and that we want you is pull what is relevant to you, what works. We
yeah,
all learn differently, we apply differently. So if you got something that works for Ben, boom. Because like I touched on the first episode. So yeah, so like some of the big challenges and stuff we get into is with what I love with Ben is I'm a very black and white analytical person. So for me, things are here. And I thought I had a pretty good memory. People are like, wow, you got a photographic memory, because I could recall facts and dates and stuff. And I thought I was doing great.
yeah.
Then I met Ben. Realized, as though I thought I was pretty good in your own way, brag on yourself. You're like, man, I'm pretty good. People are impressed by my ability. And then Ben comes in within like 2 seconds, and I'm like, how did you memorize like 700 decks of cards or whatever it is that Ben does? And then he's like, starts telling me these techniques. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. I'm curious. Um, Challenging. Some people, like I said in the last episode, the sun list. For some people, that's a very, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, that's like a good basic step to start, is an understanding of the sun list, and it's a good beginner stepping stone. For me,
Yeah,
that was like taking like advanced physics or something like that in college. It was like very something out that way out of my comfort zone,
yeah,
and being able to get my brain from the black and white perspective of being able to articulate and put a number to a color or to some type of object that
mm,
related to a behavior, to where then we're calling that, I can be like, okay, one is, pupil dilation, for
mm,
example, and things like, and go readily through my brain constantly. I can go through a number up to 30 behaviors that we put
mm,
together. And now it's got me to the point of I make sure I keep up with that. And I made videos of that because I was doing that stuff because I was challenging. Part of my challenge to
Then
myself
you're
and for Ben was
on the
how much
stepper.
can this go? I was going for runs. I was going to the
Yeah,
gym. I was elevating my heart rate to
yeah,
like 180 beats per minute, recording on the treadmill after a workout and going through the behaviors and going, okay, wow. So even under physical exertion, stress, this stuff works. It
yeah.
committed. And now when I sit, talk to people, or I'm having different conversations, I'm want to pay attention to behaviors. I'm writing numbers down on a piece of paper, and people are like, "What?" I was like, "Yeah, they're just numbers," but it lets me know a particular part of the conversation during a certain block of the behaviors that we put together are
Mm,
common ones when it comes to want to clarify,
mm,
validate when it comes to people maybe
mm.
potentially being deceptive with us or
Yeah,
not
yeah,
telling us the whole truth. So when I see consistent numbers in that targeted area, I need to go back to that part of the
yeah.
conversation so I can get the whole contextual picture, because we all know there's no lying behavior, people. You'll learn more about
Yeah.
that later on as well.
Oh God, if
but
you can sit through how
there's so
angry we
much
get
things
about some
out
of the
there.
topics.
Um, but those are things that if I never met you, Ben, like I never would have known. But those are just things like people don't like think of, like unless you're guys like in your field, people like you who are super recognizers, people that are mentalists, things that are constantly having to do things because you need to have, I think, that more in depth of the Sherlock Holmes, go inside of the
well,
brain and process
well,
all these, the
the,
memory
the,
palace per se
yeah,
that you
the
do as
the th-
well.
the things that I noticed through specifically through the security work was there seems to be a lot of stigma and perception attached to the specifics of training. Like you should do this because of X and whatever. And like one of my first doorman jobs, believe it or not, was on a McDonald's. Of all places, it was on a McDonald's, and it was in a place called Festival Park, and their car park was like a scene from the Fast and the Furious films. So we get everything from drug deals, drug taking, fights, booze, the ladies of the night, shall we say, as they're called, the first profession, and whatnot. And it's where I really learned that yeah, physical stuff is all well and good, but if you just talk to these people first and foremost, you've got an understanding first of all, because I'm like 18, 19. Most of these other guys and girls there are 18, 19. So the reflex
Mm.
is, well, why should I listen to you? For the older ones that were still doing it, well, you're this young pup. Why should I listen to you? And you get to bridge that gap first of all. So the more time I spent trying things that my boss was telling me not to do, right? The more kind of exploration and use within it, and it got to that stage where I didn't feel that I was equipped to discount any particular kind of training or idea or understanding until I'd used it. So when somebody first mentioned mentalists to me, I was like, oh yeah, magicians, all that's kind of yeah. What do you? Shut up, go away, this kind of thing. And then you read a book and like I was hanging out recently with a couple of people that like could look at you, say a couple of words, and like have an idea about where you live, like, and have an idea about your family dynamic at home, and like this is and like, not hyperbole or anything. This is something that I saw, and that has a direct protective connotation element for your personal information. When it comes to memory work, when you're mentioning with the sun list, writing down a number by something specific is the most innocuous thing you can do, yet it means something to us. Most people would take between I don't know, 2 and 3 days worth of training to get 30 behaviors and their effects into their head to be able to use at a moment's notice. We apply the right technique to it that nobody else does, to the best of my knowledge, which isn't completely comprehensive. I've just never seen it. That's not to say that it doesn't exist.
It'll say doesn't exist, but we're darn proud of it.
We
Because
are right. We are darn proud of it. But
yeah,
and a lot
because I
of
look at it, if you can get me to learn it and do it based off, I know how I am and how that, and I'm like, wow, the fact that I can do readily recall, I'm like, well, I'm
yeah.
probably one of the harder test subjects you can have, because there's so many people that their brains work so much better, I think, and more
Yeah.
flawlessly than mine. But it was like, wow, okay. And I was like, now that we've done this, I'm like, Ben, you just like sped up my time so much when it came to things. The fact that I could just jot down a number 1 through 30 based off like the top 30 behaviors that we created off of the experience I have in the law enforcement field. Like this is like, I mean, this is a game changer for interviewers,
Well,
you
as I
know, and it's like,
understand
wow,
it,
and it's
and
not just law
you'll,
enforcement, but in anyone in general, like us having a
yeah,
conversation, like, oh, wow,
yeah. Well,
interesting. I could do this.
as I understand it, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. Those in law enforcement roles in the states don't really get a lot of time for training and education and learning.
No, not in the education aspect when it comes to the human part, which I always
Mm.
found very disheartening, you know,
Yeah.
because it's you spend time, you go to the firing range, even that's not done as much, and driving
Mm.
that they do 90% more on a shift, and they only do a
Right.
course in the academy. Very few departments do any refreshers. But when it came to communication, there's a very, very small part. And depending on where you go, there's a lot of emphasis on verbal judo. There's pros and cons to both. Um, I was never a fan of verbal
Mm.
judo. There are aspects that are great. It is a good program. There's a lot of guys that get a lot of good use out of it. I wasn't particularly one of them. Uh,
Right.
but if you're interested in it, go check it out. I don't dismiss any. Like I said, what
Mm.
works for one doesn't work for the other. Doesn't mean that they're necessarily bad.
That's
Now, there's
key.
some that are,
Mm.
but for me and how I interact and how I communicate, some of the stuff was just too. It took away the you being authentic,
Yes.
if that makes sense, you know, because it's like it wants you to use particular type of words or certain things
Mm.
here, which is great for de-escalation. But I'm like, but if they don't fit your personal profile and they don't necessarily fit how you interact and work, then
Yeah.
it's not going to work. It doesn't matter how
No.
great the whole technique is if it doesn't
Yeah.
fit you as a person. Like if you gave me some techniques, Ben, and it was all in, you know, for lack of a better term, don't want to answer the Queen's English, you know, because we all know, even though you're in the UK, we speak the same language, there are different
Yeah.
words that mean
There
different
are.
or slightly different.
Mm.
And if you gave me that, or even if you wrote it down for me to write it down to give to somebody,
Mm.
right? Just the spelling of behavior is
Yeah.
different between us.
Yeah.
So if I
Yeah. Yeah.
wrote it, you know, the way you wrote it here and gave it to an American, you know, what I mean, that's going to trigger like,
Mm.
you know, so it doesn't match and fit
Mm.
the profile. It wouldn't work for me. Now it could work for you or someone else in the UK, but me here in the States, culturally and whatnot, not
Mm.
necessarily. So
Absolutely.
pick and pull out of it what you want. Back to your point with the train, no, because it's like we're working shifts depending on the agency. Some are very, very busy and things. It's
Mm.
just the things you should spend the time on, and especially now in a generation where everything is tech happy, everyone's texting and things
Yeah.
through phone. The art of a face-to-face conversation has been lost over the years, and that's one of the biggest things I see is a very difficult thing for law enforcement because you're getting younger generations in that have never really had a face-to-face conversation. And
Mm.
tech, and you got the guys like me that have been older. You don't know how
Mm.
to communicate to those guys. You can't get much out of them. And you
Yeah.
got some people, old guys, stubborn, set in their ways. They won't talk. And then you're sending the young guys, like you said, you're 18, 19 years old at a McDonald's. Well,
Yeah.
figure taking a young 21-year-old wet behind the ears that's never talked to anybody, and they've got to go to a house where a husband and wife are arguing, and they're the age of his parents. And just like you said, that cop gets the same thing. I was that young cop.
Mm.
What do I got to listen to you? And, you know, and you got to try to articulate to
Yeah.
a 40, 50-year-old person in your 20s with, you know, the little life experience you have. I need to de-escalate you. I need to get you to do
Absolutely.
this because I don't want to have to arrest you or
Mm.
have to maybe use of force on you
Yeah.
or whatever. You know, those are the biggest hurdles. And if you don't
100%.
have the conversational aspect at all,
Mm.
those situations are even more difficult and more dire because they're also the most dangerous. You know,
Yeah.
those domestic situations dangerous because you can get up
You
there and a
can
husband and wife will
go.
be fighting and she'll yell
Yeah.
at you and she'll be like, he hit me, he did this, arrest him. But the minute you arrest him, she flips the switch. Why are you arresting him? And now she's attacking you. Like it happens, and these things become very
I've had one.
volatile, very,
Yeah.
very,
Yeah.
very, very quick. You know,
Yeah.
so it's like, you know, why aren't we
Mm.
teaching and training in the areas where we're specific and do the most work or where the skills are perishable
Absolutely.
when it comes to that? And then since we kind of dove on that, because we're going to try to keep this episode not as long as the other, we want to use the longer
Mm.
episodes for our trusted partners and things, but we just wanted to come back.
Yeah.
So as we kind of alluded to, and you kind of see like behind me and stuff here. So I served in the military. I served in the United States Marine Corps. I enlisted when I was at the ripe old age of 17. Um, all my experience, out of my experience, comes from when I got into law enforcement. And one of the things that I had there was I knew that I had a passion for wanting to understand humans. And in the line of work that I was in, I wanted to understand it to the point to where I wanted to make my peers better. I wanted to be
Excuse
able
me.
to enhance our safety and the safety of the people we are entrusted to protect better by being better able to work and understand humans. So I was like, started really studying some things. I got into the OODA Loop. We learned about that in the
Yeah.
military, the whole decision making
Yeah.
process. So then I started correlating and playing with Boyd's OODA, and this all started when I was a young patrol guy and playing with things. And I would watch my body cameras and how I interacted with people, and I started playing with just how little shifts on how I
Mhm.
move slightly to one side or back. I can see how engaged and focused someone was on me. Then
Yeah.
I started being able to piece behaviors together when they were like, okay, this is going to lead into where I started developing the pre-threat, pre-attack indicator processes in my mind of what to expect, what to do, when they're going to run, where are their feet pointed, what's going on here. And then as that went on and brought that training in and getting guys more aware and watching videos, and then you start becoming more conscious and safety and in there with the awareness, um, it started going into when I got into investigations and stuff of understanding the OODA, but in a conversational aspect. And that really triggered for me when I became a hostage negotiator. And what the fun part for me was with that was the conversational aspect like we're having today,
Yeah.
because what I found, I don't really want to say fun because it's kind of fun personally of the challenge, not of the actual work, right? Because the
Mm.
work is high stress. A lot of
Mm.
things can go really, really bad. Things can go really, really good. The fun aspect was to be able to challenge yourself,
Mm.
because in those situations, I don't have the ability like to look at you now, Ben, even virtually. You know,
Mm.
I'm in a operations center. We're in a negotiation operation that we're either in a room or outside behind a tree. Anywhere do we have to set up, sound, and all I have is maybe a throw phone in there
Mm.
or a cell phone or some kind of thing, and all I have is an audio connection to that
Yeah.
person that's in distress. And that's where I partner people in. The neatest thing skill I think you can have is active listening skills, because man, the stuff that I learned just from being able to listen to the tonality, the cadence, the speed of it, you could be able to detect if there actually was a true emotion there based off how the speech came out. And you
Yeah.
could sit there, as black and white as my mind was with that, I could sit with headphones on and close my eyes and just
Mm.
listen. I can picture and envision what emotion, what that person was doing, and then
Mm.
utilize that to then have that conversation with them. You know,
Mm.
sounds to me, Ben, you're a little upset today. Oh yeah, and you let them
Yeah.
talk, and you
Yeah.
find these ways, and you learn what triggers and hooks are. And then once I got that, and then I get to go into like an interview room as an investigator, and I've honed that skill set, and now I
Mm.
get to see the person. Man, when you listen, and now I get to see how you're changing your posture in a
Yeah.
chair, what you're omitting from your statement, what you're
Mm.
adding. I can visually see you're trying to make it sound emotional, but there is no emotion, because I tell
Yeah.
people when people talk about, there's always something there. Someone
Yeah.
says they're happy, you're going to get a little bit of a smile. If
Yeah.
you get, yeah, Ben, I'm happy today.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. The
Mm.
first clue should be like, okay, there's a disconnect there because I should have seen something. When you speak
Absolutely.
emotion, part of that emotion seeps out. So we
Absolutely.
could pick on things that we need to validate, dismiss,
Yeah. Yeah.
clarify, which is something that I've come up over the years with that I just love when I talk to them. Like, look, just stop for a minute and just find out
Yeah.
what you need to do. You need to validate it, dismiss it, clarify it. But that turned into then I had opportunities to work in schools as a school resource officer. I got to go work in a jail.
Yeah.
And then while working in a jail, that was part of my other behavioral process, because then I got to really hone in on pre-threat indicators, because when you can sit and you're like in this fishbowl, you watch, because
Mm.
people when they're serving their time in jails, they really watch the officers in there. And I could see who they were picking out, what officer picking out, who had the behaviors, their posturing, what they're doing, who
Mm.
they could manipulate.
Mm.
There's a good book out there called The Art of the Con. They are
Yeah.
really good. They are masters of manipulators, and that helps with the
Mm.
defense against this, because I've seen it on multiple
Mm.
aspects and watching it, and then watch their behaviors, how they interact when you enter, their environment. Look how it changes. Whose head turns? Who's paying attention to you? Who's overly paying attention to you? Who leaves? Who goes back into there's so many things that I started creating all these behaviors, and then you could pick up like, okay, those two are going to fight today. Well, how can you
Yeah.
tell? well, boom, 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 they've done X, Y, Z, and based off what I've watched in this fishbowl now for the last couple months, and then it started creating training for that. Like,
Mm.
hey, our guys are unaware; they're not situationally aware. They don't understand that when they go in there and they might walk in like you and I walk in there, Ben. We don't talk about anything personal, bring up anything because you'll find those inmates. I've walked in plenty of pods, and I'm talking about going into a maximum security pod. These are your murderers and stuff. And
Yeah.
the first thing got to be like, hey man, so I take it Joe's still on vacation, and you just kind of look at him, and I'm like, say again, oh yeah, man, Joe, he's been gone, the last 2 weeks. This is typically his shift, but you're here, and I remember him saying, I think he was going to Mexico, for 2 weeks. And he's like, he should be back soon, right? And you're just like, okay. And then when you have these talk with these officers and these young officers, it's like, hey, mindful what you're saying, what you're doing. They know your work schedule better than you.
Yeah.
Don't think if you don't upset them that they're on these phones, they don't have contact to the outside. They can find out where you live. They can find out what's going. There's potential threats for you outside these walls,
Mm.
and they don't think of that, and they don't train for that. And I was one of those young cops growing up to where we always looked at people working in jails as redheaded stepchildren. They didn't really get the same respect as the guys out on the street, right? We call them like the babysitters,
Yeah.
and they didn't really get the respect. But I'll tell you, once I went in and actually filled that role, I looked and I was like, man, there's so much stuff here to where my mindset changed to where before I put a guy on the street, like a young kid on the street, to test them if they're going to perhaps make it in this industry and the career path, put them in a jail. Put them in a jail where all they have is a radio, their mouth, and their hands, because that's the only tools you have. A radio to call for help. So you learn better communication skills,
Yeah.
right? You learn how to de-escalate, problem solve a lot better. And you get better with this because so many people, cops on the street, have so many tools on their tool belts today. They get over reliant on them and they don't train on them, which is a problem. They wind up having their own guns taken, their tasers taken. They're drawing a taser when they should never be drawing a taser based on the proximity of the person, where they should be hands on. They lack those fundamental basic skills of communications and those things.
Mm.
So I felt like if you go in there and you can go work 2 years in a jail and survive and come out, one, you have a better aspect. And what I liked about it being in a jail as well is when you come in there, I can go to a computer and I have a whole documented history of you. If Ben's in XYZ prison, I can sit here. I know how old Ben is. I know where
Yeah.
Ben's from. I know what Ben's been charged with, what crimes he's done, his criminal past. I have access to all that. So guess what? I hold a lot of the cards because I have all the information.
Yeah.
So as opposed to a cop on the street, I get a call to Ben's house for a potential incident. I'm going in blind, right? Because all I have is what a dispatcher is telling me. All I know is that I may have a name. I may know it's Ben. I may know it's not. I have an address and a potential incident. And a lot of times the incident that you get, that you're getting told on the radio is not the incident when you get to the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could be worse or it could be a lot less. There's just so many unknowns. So I'm like, why not put these guys in this area where there's more knowns, give them the tools and build them up. So then when you go out there to the unknown, you're better prepared. You can be better situationally where you can have a different mindset to it
Yeah. Yeah.
and approach things differently in that
Yeah.
aspect. So, and that's where I'll tie that up with that, because that's where like I take that into the EP close protection role now, is all that stuff now and how that makes you better, because now we're out in a lot of unknowns and we're protecting clients and families, and you need to be, tuned in to those things.
100%, mate. 100%. And I could be quite lofty and connect it to Socrates again, in that he had a particular problem with man and writing things down because it imbues us with the nature of forgetting. And it's similar to what you were saying about the tool belt. If I've got all of these tools around me, I don't need to do any active thinking. I don't need to do any active listening or engaging or problem solving, because I've got all of this that would do it all for
Well,
me.
what it constitutes is, and you could probably put a more academic part to it, but what I found, it creates over reliance and overconfidence,
Yeah.
and they think that will trump lack of ability,
100%.
lack of training, complacency. If I stand here like this and puff my chest, and you see all these cool tools on me, then you're going to listen. and
Yeah.
that's not how it works.
Well, that's the thing.
But you can watch tons of videos to show you that's what happens, and it's a
Yeah.
bad thing to see, and we need to start changing those things.
Well, the Milgram experiment will only go so far in terms of the reaction towards authority, right? In that if somebody's just wearing a white coat and has a clipboard asking me to click this 240-volt battery to kill someone, that will only go so far in that setting where there's no kind of perception that anything could escalate. Where the
Sure.
situations we enter
But
into, it could very much go that way. It needs to be
yeah, and
considered.
then I would even challenge that too for anyone listening, and then this is for Ben too, because is Milgram wouldn't work today. I don't think Milgram works today because your society and your environment is so much different. And the reason I say that is because society, at least here in the US, has changed so much to
Mm.
where now there is a lot of blatant disrespect to law enforcement and
Yeah,
those in authority. There's a
yeah.
lot more pushback. Look at the pushback you're seeing with protests and things like that. So
Hmm.
people are more apt to stand up against that in authority now, to where I think if you went into that same white coat, you
Yeah.
don't get the same results in the experiment because we have fundamentally changed with what
You
we're
need to
willing to
change the
accept or
context. Yeah,
see.
absolutely.
Yeah. Some, yes, you can, but it's going to come down to those interpersonal type skills, but you're not going to automatically get that perceived authority, or people readily jump into, okay, since you're this, I'm going to respect you. There's a lot more work involved because people today are more blatantly going to tell you to shove off than they are to do anything else. So I like that as a great tool because you can see where you could push
Mm,
the bounds
mm,
within those societal norms and what
mm,
you would expect. But we've gotten so far away from that now
mm.
today that, like, even these kids on cell phones and the contextual things. I mean, do you really see that? Kids don't respect their parents. So
No,
if they're not respecting their parents, they're not
they're not going to
respecting at
respect
home.
anyone else. No.
Are they going to respect any? And and I'll leave it with too. Like when I was a young kid growing up, we were always had the cops pointed out to us like, hey, if you ever get lost or need anything, you go to him, ask for help. They will help you. To where you fast forward years later, I'm in a 7-Eleven, I'm in uniform, and you get a mother with a kid going, see that's a policeman behavior. He's going to arrest you. So
Mm,
we're now already started at a young age creating
mm,
fear of law enforcement, fear of that authority at those
mm,
young ages, because that's what you're programming in them. Not, hey, if you need anything or something bad happens or mom or dad are hurt, find a policeman, they can help. It's if you're bad, that guy's taking you to jail. And people don't put enough into what that does to the development stages of a young child when you consistently putting that in their head, and wonder why when they become a young teen or teenager
mm.
and a law enforcement officer comes around, why they run, fight, or else have no respect for that authority because they feel you're going to take them away from a loved one.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's part of the problems that we're seeing now that just been bubbling up and evolving over, is
Mm,
because that's what we're doing. We're allowing those things to bubble to this head and the surface, and
mm.
get to that point. But when do we say enough's enough, when we start dialing it back and saying, hey, look, no, we're better than this. We all get along for the most part, right? It's like
Mm.
what you see on the media and the news today would have you thinking 99% of the world is on fire and everyone is out to get each other, when in turn it's like it's the opposite. But if we're constantly fed manure and telling
Hmm.
us it's the best meal you ever have, you're going to have a stomach full of crap and
Yeah.
think you've had the meal of your life.
Yeah.
And that's what and I just feel like that's just what we've got going on.
Well, that's
um
what it is, mate. So, like with this, we're not saying that we are the authority or even an authority that should be listened to. Like, it's just popped into my head. Like, I originally applied for the police years ago, but they wouldn't allow me entry because I have a visible tattoo, and yet they still sourced me for coaching and teaching and education this way. So if you look at that on the surface as a CV, there are a number of people that would focus on the fact that, well, he's never worked in the police, but there's having them work for you. Where do you place that? So like with social media accounts, do you validate who it is that you're listening to just by the number of followers that they have? Because if it is that you are just validating it by that, you need to be asking more questions. So if you're doing
mhm.
it just by somebody's CV, you need to be asking more questions. The CVs, particularly to what we do, they're very relevant. Of course they are, but they're not the only thing. You should be listening
Yeah.
to the content and the discussion and what it is that we're saying, or whoever it is that you're listening to on whatever it is that you're interested in. Right? You should be taking it
Yeah.
into account, its application towards your life, and not accepting it just based on any perception of authority that's given by some voiceless person on the internet. Faceless person. We obviously have a voice.
No, I mean you're 100% right. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things there, right? Is just because they are an influencer doesn't mean it,
Yeah.
because you got to start looking at what got them there. For a lot of those, for a lot of people, I mean, they pay for that,
Yeah.
so they pay for that exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like, okay, well, is it relevant? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to start reverse engineering and backing that up to, okay, there is it because they're trying to get out there because they're trying to get ahead of the greater good, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you made a lot of key points there within that, and it's 100% right. And it's with like our whole back to like the whole society thing is we want you to look at it and go, in my opinion, don't be a lemming, don't
Mm.
get it hurt and walk off the cliff.
Yes. Ask the
So many people
questions.
today, you know, there is like they blindly follow what's constantly being pushed. And
Mm.
we all know, right? We all have phones and everything today. Like I think Ben, you and I were talking, you know, you traveled to the US, you went on vacation, you went to a, you know, one of these particular states, and next thing you know, the algorithm on your phone and everything else is
Sending
telling
me
you, hey,
houses.
come visit us,
Yeah.
you know. And if you look at that every day, right? That's what
Mm.
our brain and our mind starts to take in, and then we're
Yeah.
starting to accept. But what we're telling you is you don't have to accept it. I'm not saying go out there and be blatantly defiant and
Mm.
say all hell break loose and we're not listening to any rules.
Mm.
Just saying, look, step away for a minute, unplug, step to the side of the box, look in from a different perspective.
Mm.
And what I would say is, you know, if you're looking at the box, you've got multiple sides and corners, right? There's 4 sides. Walk around each side.
Yeah.
Get on a step stool, look at it from the top down. Lay on your side, look at it from the bottom up. Like change
Mm.
the angles and perspectives and go, okay, how does this fit? How does it work? And what you'll find is one, you'll get a lot more benefits out of these things, because one, you'll start be able to see through the stuff you need to see through.
Mm.
Or some of the other things I'll look at too is some of the things that the people out there that are doing the stuff the shady way and are just looking at it to
Mm.
just take people's money, and they initially will start off with a core key concept that you can find that there is good, that you can validate and go, okay,
Mm.
that's great. And then it's kind of like I don't know, I'm not a magician, but it's one of those things like you see on TV a lot, right? Where someone holds up a roll of money,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
like they show you the $100 bill on the outside, and they're like, hey man, I'll give you this, and you get it, and
Mm.
inside it's a whole wrap of ones or fake money on the inside,
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
just got the $20 bill. It's like that. That's what you're getting sometimes. Is you think, man, I invested $1,000 into this training,
Mm.
but you get 50 cents worth
Yeah. The
of
ones
investment
underneath.
back out of it, if that. So
Absolutely.
as Ben was saying, to kind of wrap this up, you got some insights about us. Again, like he said, you can find us everywhere, but this never was for us to come out here and want to talk to an audience that we're hoping to get in here and just have these discussions with and just regurgitate and tell you this is what we
Yeah.
do and all this. It's not. We want you to go wherever it needs to take you,
Yeah.
personally, professionally, whatever industry you're in. We just want you to do it with the right perspective, the right understandings, challenge things. Don't accept
Mm.
everything. Challenge. I think it was Bob Pointer, one of our colleagues. You guys are even he uses the ABCs that he learned when he was a young police officer in the UK. And I don't want to butcher the bill because Bob will probably listen to this and be like, Jim, what are you doing? But it was assume nothing, right?
Yeah.
Believe nothing, challenge every doubt.
Yeah.
Somewhere along those lines.
Love it.
And I love that because that's kind of falls in line with how I come up with by validate, dismiss,
Mm.
clarify. Everybody should have their own way of how they run things through their filters, right?
Mm.
Our biases, because
Mm.
that's what gets in the way, right? Our ego,
Mm.
and I think Ben, you and I were talking about some people that they jump into some of these training because it's a cool guy stuff and it's a pounding of the chest
Yeah.
and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, I got to do this. And then it's like, no, take your emotions out of it, take the ego
Yeah.
out of it, look at it objectively, logically, and go, is this pertinent to my job? Is this going to give me what I need to get out of it? Does this help me advance my career? Does this advance me personally in my personal growth? Or is this just something I just want to sit there and say, I took this class from XYZ training company and I'm this badass now,
No.
and if that's your reason,
Yeah,
then
jackass.
I would say you need to reevaluate your career, reevaluate what you're doing, because in term, if that's what your motivation is
Mm.
within an industry, then the industry is not for you.
No.
It should never be about tons of certificates, things on the wall. You should be doing the training, and my part on this is I tell people is you need to be selfish when it comes to your learning, understanding your books, your training. Be as selfish as possible, humanly possible, because you want to take in everything you can. That's what it's going to make you a better human and a better person. But once you have that knowledge and we've took it in and we're applying it, we need to be selfless. And
Mm.
that's kind of where I'm at today, where my says selfless. Whatever I've gained, experiences I've gained, I want to give back. If I
Yeah.
can help somebody make a better decision, if I can help somebody change the way they're thinking, that changes their environment in a relationship or within their job, or gives them a different mindset or a different understanding
Mm.
on leadership and personal accountability and things like that's where it's at, because these are all lessons and things that, as I speak with on it, is all stuff that I learned. And a lot of us learn these things the hard way. And if I
Yeah.
can help someone trip a little less, maybe skip that pothole entirely, then I
Yeah.
feel that's what we naturally are here as humans, right? We naturally should be here helping each other. And I'm going to be as selfless as possible when it
Exactly.
comes to saying, hey, look, do this. Don't get sucked in this trap, because you'll find out over time if you're not vetting and doing things
Mm.
properly, the only one that hurts in the end is you. All right.
Mm.
Because the other person is going to cash that check at the end of the day. They don't care. They're running you through kind of like a puppy mill of sorts when it comes to
Oh,
training in some of these companies or different things. Employers, unfortunately, the bigger the organization, you're just a number. You can be
mm.
replaced tomorrow. So look and understand that everything you should be doing is to develop you to make you better. And the
Mm.
best thing so you can be more resilient, have a better understanding of
Yeah.
those things around you. And that's what I hope you get out of this. And I hope there you come back and listen, because we're just going to be giving you guys a bunch of stuff that we feel over time that you can put together, and make you just a better, well-rounded, I think, human, and
Yeah.
makes us all better for the long term down the road.
Well, absolutely. Protective insight. Though it is a title for the podcast, it is insight into how you can protect yourselves with more observational questions. Insight into how you can protect your family with these kind of questions that you can ask yourself. Like just the kind of closing sentiment from me. I just had Neil deGrasse Tyson pop into my head. I watched his masterclass yesterday.
Nice.
It's basically on critical thinking, and his analogy was, if somebody comes up to you and says, "Oh my God, I've got this amazing crystal that gets rid of all this disease for you. It's great. Do you want to buy it?" To immediately dismiss it and go, "Well, that's nonsense and homeopathy," or to go, "Yes, yes, let me buy it." Both are intellectually lazy. For you to stand there and go, in the face of this, okay, well, what kind of diseases does it work on? Is there some that it prefers over others? Are there any kind of conditions that I need to be aware of? What am I going to get out of it the other side? Are there any? What happens if the crystal breaks? All of these types of questions that come out
Hmm.
of this type of thing. And in a nutshell, well, for me personally, that's what we're doing with this,
Yeah.
is providing people, well, hopefully attempting to provide people a way to ask better questions, to shape the information that they have, so they can make better decisions moving forwards, as you say.
Yeah. 100%.
That's it
Yeah.
then, guys. So we kept you a little bit longer than we had intended, but both me and Jim are very fond of talking. Um, so that's
That
going to
is
be a
true.
risk. That's going to be a risk that you'll run with listening to the podcast. So whenever you do, get a comfy seat. Make sure you're not, or you're driving a long distance. Make sure that's the way that you can go. So
Yeah.
to
Make
that
sure you have
end,
something. Don't cut it off too soon. You might miss that
no,
one nugget, because I will tell you,
absolutely,
we were coming into this as well. Again, so this is us. Sorry, is
do it.
this is not scripted. This isn't
No.
anything there. Like, we have ideas and things we want to do when we
Mm.
bring people on with what we want to show you guys and give you some things there. But when it comes to Ben and I talking, this is it. You're just getting Ben and I here, just being us and doing what
Unfiltered.
we do, and want to do the best for people. So when it's like there, we have a point, as you can
Yeah.
tell, it's like, hold on, like they need a little more. We're going to give you, and that's the thing you'll get from us is you won't get
Yeah.
less. That's for sure. You will always
Yeah.
get more or something. And whether it's something you can take and it's relevant or not, that's up for you to decide. But we're gonna leave you a trail of breadcrumbs and whatnot along the way, and we hope you meet us at the end of the journey here.
Love it. Couldn't have put it better myself. So, guys, make sure you follow the YouTube channel for more videos. If you want to see our beautiful faces talking to you, then click the subscription button below and hit the bell so you're notified of all of the new videos as they come up. It might seem like a little insignificant task that everyone moans about, but it really helps with the channel's message and the thing that we're trying to do. As well, you can also follow the podcast directly on Spotify, on Google, on Apple as well. And if you are on somewhere like LinkedIn or any of the other places that me and Jim frequent, then by all means send us a message. And given that we are both very busy chaps, we can't always reply straight away, but we will always try and reply. And I think that's the main thing that I like about the way we want to try and build this community. It's not just a listen to the podcast. It is if you want to send us a message, right? Whatever,
Send us some questions. I mean, if you work in an industry that we're not readily talking about, and you're like, hey, how does this work for us in hospitality, or how does this work in the airline industry? Message us, and we'll make it a point.
We can make it a focus.
Can do another mini podcast to tell you how, or that's a separate conversation. Like Ben said, we might not be immediate, but drop it in there. We are responsive. We will find a time. The benefit that you have with Ben and I, our time zones are dramatically apart.
Right.
So if you think
one of us will always be awake.
At night in the U.S., it's early in the morning for Ben. So one way or the other, you're going to have 24-hour coverage of some aspect, way or another. But you will get one of us.
Most customer service businesses can't offer that.
No, right? And the thing is, right, whether it's 24 hours, you get it in English. 24/7, that's hard to come by.
24/7.
Thank you all for listening. I'm going to wrap up and done because, again, this could turn into a whole other thing. This could be the never-ending podcast is what it could be turned into.
That's it. All right, guys, thank you for your time. We will see you next time. Take care.
Bye.